Okay, good morning, everybody. You may have just heard me shut the window. Someone started cutting down a tree outside. Of course, that's a great start to this. So a very warm welcome to everybody to this first ever Cuba Solidarity Campaign All Members Forum. I am Diana Holland, proud to be the chair of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign and Assistant General Secretary of Unite the Union. The past year has been incredibly difficult for everybody. And let me start by passing on my thoughts to everyone who has suffered, to everyone who has lost friends or relatives through this horrible pandemic. Cuba is, of course, also suffering from the effects of the pandemic, and we will have an in-depth update on the situation later today. But the country also continues to suffer from the ongoing illegal US blockade. And now, with the lack of income from tourism, as well as the severity of US sanctions, the pressure is intensifying. On behalf of Cuba Solidarity at this vital time, I pass on our best wishes and our solidarity to the people of Cuba. In spite of all the pressures, I'm pleased to say on behalf of the CSC executive that the Cuba Solidarity Campaign has still managed to carry out some wonderful campaigns. And you'll hear more about these later. We've kept in touch with members. Cuba C magazine has continued, and with more great online resources. And we've managed to maintain an organization throughout this very challenging period. I know our members and affiliates are doing all they can to keep up solidarity activities with Cuba and to support the work of CSC. And this is my chance as chair to thank each and every one of you. As you know, we had to cancel our 2020 annual general meeting, and we're still looking at holding this year's AGM sometime in the autumn. So we felt it was only right to organise this meeting now to update our members and affiliates about how the campaign has responded to the situation. As I said, our first all members online forum. This is not a decision-making forum, but we do want to share information and update each other. So today we'll hear from a number of people about the campaign, about our activities, the finances, membership, and all that's happening. But please do get in touch with CSC at any time with ideas, questions, and suggestions. Towards the end of the meeting, we've planned to hold an online show of support for the Cuban people and against the blockade. So please prepare a small message, if you haven't done already, on a piece of paper or card, so we can all hold them up at the same time. We can then take some screenshots, and after, we'll be able to send them to the media here and in Cuba. There are some messages in the chat, I hope, that you can use, or join in with a fist or a wave or a Cuban flag or a local group banner or a Cuban t-shirt, whatever, to show solidarity. Today's action will be one of several building up to the May vote at the United Nations on the blockade, part of our contribution to the international actions on the blockade, along with a series of online meetings and, of course, our early day motion in Parliament. After our speakers, we will have time to take questions, so please type any additional questions into the chat. We have also had some questions submitted in advance, and these will be answered throughout the forum. We want to finish by 1 o'clock, so if by any chance there are so many questions we can't answer them all at the time, the remaining ones will be included online in our report of the meeting, so everybody gets to see them. These are difficult and demanding times for everyone, but this is our time to come together. So I am now very pleased to introduce our first speaker, who is Fernando Gonzalez. As many of you will know, Cuba is blocked from accessing many web applications, including Zoom. So this contribution, unfortunately, has to be a pre-recorded message. But it is a great honor that our first speaker is Fernando Gonzalez, president of ECAP, the Cuban Institute of Friendship. And of course, we also know Fernando as one of the brave Miami Five, who spent so long imprisoned in the US for defending their country against terrorism. A very warm welcome to our first speaker.
Estimados amigos, con sumo placer agradezco la gentil invitación enviada al Instituto Cubano de Amistad con los Pueblos para participar de manera virtual en esta reunión con todos los miembros de la campaña de solidaridad con Cuba en el Reino Unido. La situación epidemiológica mundial ha imposibilitado desde hace un año ya poder estrechar nuestras manos y encontrarnos en persona. No obstante, el confinamiento y la distancia no han constituido un obstáculo para que nos conectemos. Unidos hemos hecho de las redes sociales nuestra principal plataforma de trabajo y la hermandad y solidaridad se han multiplicado considerablemente por los 5 continentes. Me satisface mucho poder dirigir hoy mis palabras a todos ustedes, muchos de los cuales tuve el placer de conocer cuando visité Reino Unido en el año 2018. Visita en la que pude apreciar el compromiso inestimable de nuestros amigos y amigas británicos, quienes tan incansablemente batallaron por mi regreso y el de mis 4 hermanos, por lo cual les estaremos eternamente agradecidos. El recién comenzado año 2021 carga aún consigo los estragos de una pandemia que, junto con la lamentable pérdida de millones de vidas humanas, ha puesto en evidencia la incapacidad del modelo capitalista para enfrentarla eficientemente, así como la insostenibilidad de sus sistemas de salud, la inoperancia de los mecanismos para la atención social, la injusticia y la desigualdad generadas por años por un modelo atroz que afecta con creces a las comunidades más vulnerables, los excluidos, las minorías y los desposeídos. La humanidad ha logrado sacudirse de 4 años de una administración estadounidense que ha dejado un funesto legado tanto en la arena internacional como en las relaciones con nuestro país. Donald Trump llevó a Estados Unidos hacia un estado de polarización extrema, convirtiendo esa nación en una cada vez más dividida, xenófoba y racista. La prepotente política exterior que impulsó se mostró totalmente desconectada de los principales mecanismos internacionales y de consenso colectivos, atentando de manera continua contra la paz y el orden mundial. Durante los 4 años de ese mandato, no cejaron en su intento fallido por vencer la resistencia del pueblo cubano, mediante el incremento sin precedentes de una política agresiva y de criminal bloqueo. El acoso, la persecución, la difamación y las groseras presiones del gobierno estadounidense contra otros países, con la intención de sabotear nuestros vínculos comerciales e impedir que Cuba recibiera la ayuda necesaria para enfrentar la pandemia, nos puso ante una situación difícil cuyo enfrentamiento ha implicado altos costos a nuestra economía. Entre varias acciones, resaltamos los empeños por afectar el prestigio de la salud pública cubana, impulsando campañas para denigrar nuestra colaboración médica, de la cual se han beneficiado más de 60 países a lo largo de 6 décadas de revolución. Solo en el año 2020, más de 3.000 profesionales agrupados en 53 contingentes de la brigada Henry Reeve apoyaron diferentes naciones para enfrentar los embates de la COVID-19. Este gesto altruista de los profesionales cubanos caló hondo en las naciones receptoras y del sentido de la gratitud brotó la propuesta para el Premio Nobel de la Paz, una candidatura que honra profundamente a un proyecto de Fidel en este mundo gobernado por el egoísmo y las reglas del mercado. Y en ese empeño, y por no dejar que la injusticia manchara tan honroso contingente, ustedes, queridos amigos, han realizado una encomiable labor en defensa de ese proyecto. Agradecemos profundamente los esfuerzos de la campaña de solidaridad con Cuba, a su comité ejecutivo, a los grupos locales que operan en las diferentes ciudades, a todos los miembros y afiliados de la campaña y en particular a los sindicatos que una vez más abrazaron esta causa como suya propia y levantaron enérgicamente sus voces para enfrentar la ignominia. Significativo ha sido que más de 7.000 personas unieron sus firmas a la petición de la campaña para el otorgamiento del Nobel, incluyendo 42 personalidades, tanto académicos como personalidades de renombre, así como miembros de los parlamentos en Londres y Escocia y de la Cámara de los Lores, los cuales presentaron sus nominaciones de manera formal al Comité Noruego. Todo este movimiento ha sido realmente impresionante, reconocido por nuestro Parlamento, nuestro Instituto y agradecido profundamente por todo el pueblo de Cuba. De igual manera, alcanza un valor incalculable la ayuda económica enviada con la recaudación de más de 30.000 libras esterlinas que se tradujeron en la compra y adquisición de materiales e insumos imprescindibles para la atención médica a los contagiados. La carta abierta enviada al gobierno de los Estados Unidos demandando la eliminación temporal del bloqueo con el objetivo de que pudiéramos obtener los insumos médicos necesarios para enfrentar la pandemia, alcanzó la asombrosa cifra de 17.000 firmas desde diversos lugares del mundo y fue apoyada por cerca de 50 miembros del Parlamento británico. Este ha sido un ejemplo más de la lealtad y aprecio de nuestros amigos, quienes nos acompañan siempre en las situaciones más adversas, en el peor de los escenarios y defienden el espacio que sea necesario nuestro derecho pleno a construir el país que soñamos sin injerencia y sin imposiciones externas. El uso de las tecnologías digitales de comunicación nos ha permitido reinventar nuestras formas de lucha y continuar la batalla ideológica. Las plataformas digitales, las videoconferencias y los foros virtuales se han convertido en nuestras calles. Indudablemente, la campaña de solidaridad con Cuba en el Reino Unido ha ocupado un papel destacado en este sentido, aprovechando cada espacio de manera creativa. En ese escenario, hemos visto proyectarse en tiempo real los antiguos y nuevos planes del gobierno de los Estados Unidos contra la revolución. Nos enfrentamos hoy a una activa campaña contrarrevolucionaria que estimula la desobediencia civil, la ejecución de sabotajes a locales de interés económico, de servicios e instituciones, que ataca nuestra cultura, nuestros valores más genuinos y nuestras conquistas, distorsionando la realidad y tratando de implantar el caos y la confrontación violenta. Existe en Europa una derecha exiliada cubana pro bloqueo que, aliada a los sectores más reaccionarios en Miami, pugnan con fuerza para revertir los avances alcanzados mediante el acuerdo de diálogo político y cooperación entre la Unión Europea y Cuba e impedir retomar el proceso de normalización de las relaciones con la administración Biden en Estados Unidos. Personajes aislados, escudándose en las tan gastadas y manipuladas etiquetas de supuesta libertad de expresión y de supuestos derechos humanos, han sido utilizados groseramente para hacer creer a la opinión pública mundial que Cuba es una nación fallida, un país que se cae a pedazos y que la supuesta dictadura comunista implantada en ella debe acabar ya. Queridos hermanos y hermanas, en medio de toda esa agresión, los cubanos y cubanas nos hemos mantenido en el empeño de hacer de esta tierra un país próspero para todos sus hijos. Nuestro presidente Miguel Díaz-Canel expresó en diciembre del pasado año que el destino de nuestro pueblo es crecerse ante los desafíos. Está en los genes de la nación cubana, forjada en la resistencia y la rebeldía de todos aquellos que nos han antecedido. En esos instantes nos encontramos inmersos en el proceso económico más complejo de los últimos años y que no admite se posponga, pues tendría costos aún mayores en el tiempo. Cuba necesita transformar su economía, lograr mayores índices de eficiencia, productividad y competitividad, desarrollo tecnológico y de sus recursos, lo cual repercutirá en el perfeccionamiento de nuestras conquistas sociales y en la calidad de vida del pueblo en general. Hoy mostramos con satisfacción el resultado de meses de intenso trabajo de nuestra abnegada comunidad científica. El mes que corre será testigo del avance de la fase 3 de las primeras vacunas cubanas y latinoamericanas, la cual ya constituye un hito y un orgullo para la ciencia cubana. Este proyecto, que es en esencia humanitario, porque no solo beneficiará a la población cubana, sino también a muchos otros pueblos del mundo, recibe también el impacto del recrudecimiento del bloqueo. Es un acto que condenamos y por el cual acudimos una vez más a la comunidad internacional y a nuestros amigos para denunciarlo. Los exhortamos a que nos sigan acompañando en esta lucha contra el bloqueo, exigiendo su inmediato e incondicional levantamiento. Continúen promoviendo acciones para sensibilizar a aquellos que aún no comprenden el terrible impacto que tiene esa política, no solo en Cuba, sino en la cotidianidad de muchas naciones, dado su marcado carácter extraterritorial. El bloqueo, más que un asunto entre Estados Unidos y Cuba, es una violación de los derechos humanos de los ciudadanos del mundo también, que son privados de intercambiar y relacionarse con nuestro pueblo. Nuestra batalla continúa. Cuba seguirá labrando su camino de solidaridad, independencia y soberanía a pesar del bloqueo. El camino no es fácil, pero con la unidad y resistencia de nuestro pueblo y con el incondicional apoyo de ustedes, continuaremos nuestro viaje hacia un mundo mejor. Vivan la amistad y la solidaridad. Patria o muerte, venceremos.
Thank you very much, Fernando, for that powerful message of humanity, anti-racism, solidarity, peace, resistance, and friendship. We will make sure that we pass on our thanks and a full report of the meeting to Fernando and to the ECAP. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce a good friend and trade union colleague, Kevin Courtney, to speak. Kevin is Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union and also a member of the TUC General Council. And he is speaking today in his capacity as TUC International spokesperson. A warm welcome, Kevin.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Diana. I'm really pleased to be here speaking to this meeting of Cuba Solidarity Campaign members and affiliates. And like Diana said earlier, it's been a tricky year for all of us. So it's great to see so many people here ready to coordinate action in solidarity with the Cuban people. And like Diana said, I am addressing you today as the international spokesperson for the TUC and the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. It's really great that 24 national trade unions, over 500 trades union regions and branches are affiliated to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. In 2019, the TUC Congress had its last motion in solidarity with Cuba, and we hosted the General Secretary and the International Secretary of the CTC, the Cuban Trades Union Center, at that Congress. The TUC recognized the efforts of the Cuban doctors, the example of international solidarity, in a General Council statement that we had at last year's online Congress. And I am really proud of the work that my own union, the National Education Union, which is affiliated to CSE, and I'm proud of the work that we've been able to do together with you on many great projects in solidarity with the Cuban people. For us, Cuba shows that when there is a political will to do it, education can be a priority, no matter what the economic circumstances. It can be free and universal, it can be inclusive for all ages and abilities, and it can be wide-ranging in arts and sciences. And not all of those things are true in our very rich country. I'm not going to rehearse the statistics on Cuba's education successes. I'm sure most of you will be well aware of them. but the fact that Cuba spends the highest percentage in the world of its GDP towards education speaks volumes about the island's priorities. They have limited resources, but they allocate the majority of their budget towards education, health, and social care. I was really pleased to attend the Pedagogica conference, a conference that Cuba has every 2 years. I went in February 2019. Delegates attend from around the world, mainly Latin America and Africa, but to discuss education. Cuba always tops the education league tables in South America, and it is recognized as being the leading country. This year marks the 60th anniversary of the Great Literacy Campaign in Cuba, one of the very first acts of the new government after the revolution. That campaign saw thousands of mainly young volunteers head out into the countryside to teach millions of poor Cubans how to read and write. Illiteracy is no problem in Cuba anymore. Many of those volunteers did so at enormous personal risk. Many were attacked by anti-Cuban mercenaries who targeted the volunteers in an attempt to spread fear amongst those who supported the new revolutionary government. Over the past 5 years, the NEU have sent delegations of UK teachers to Cuba during their October half term to visit and learn firsthand about the education system there and to see the effects of the illegal US blockade. Each year, our members return home inspired by Cuba's example, and they become increasingly active in our union at home. They come back and they talk about the inclusivity of Cuban education, the fact that so many of Cuba's education leaders are women and so many are Black. The blockade, maintained illegally by the United States for the whole life of the Cuban Revolution, has had a huge impact on all aspects of life in Cuba, including on education. We can only imagine Cuba's potential if that illegal blockade were to be finally lifted. My union's had a proud history of being involved in campaigns around this. I was really proud to support Cuba Solidarity's campaign to end the open university ban on Cuban students in 2017, an outrageous further example, a manifestation of the extraterritorial nature of that illegal blockade. Working together, including the TUC, we helped overturn that ban in this country. Members of my union have played a leading role in collecting more than 8,000 musical instruments for the Play for Cuba appeal, which we sent to Cuba in 2 40-foot shipping containers in 2019 with a send-off from our annual conference in Liverpool. And our members have been fundraising and have paid for over 30 refurbished Braille machines to be sent to the island to help children in the able Santa Maria schools for the visually impaired. But it should make you stop and think. Those machines are US made, so Cuba is unable to buy them or to buy the spare parts due to that illegal blockade. Our members fundraising and buying them is a small contribution to education in Cuba and is part of busting that blockade. Each year, my union also supports a small number of specialist teachers to come to the UK to attend conferences and training to support their work in turn in training the Cuban international medics who travel abroad to English-speaking countries. And we are so pleased to be involved, no matter how distantly, in the work of those doctors and nurses. But above all, you all know that it is that illegal blockade itself that we need to challenge. And I'm proud that my union and our members, as well as the vast majority of the trades unionists within the TUC, will stand shoulder to shoulder with you in CSC and the Cuban people in the struggle against that illegal and cruel blockade. Just think for a second what this blockade is about. Some people remember the Cuba Missile Crisis. They remember Cuba being an ally of the Soviet Union, a member of the Warsaw Pact. Some people excuse the blockade on that basis. So let's remember this as well. The Cuban Revolution is 61 years old. The Soviet Union ended 31 years ago. For more than half of the life of the Cuban Revolution, there's been no Soviet Union. So what is the USA frightened of? Are they frightened of the Cuban medical missions? How can they be a threat? Are they frightened of the money that Cuba spends on health and education? How can that be a threat? Is it about human rights? Well, what bigger example of a breach of human rights than this illegal blockade, which stops Cuba buying medicines and braille machines, or than the unfair detention of those Cuban five, the Miami Five, for so many years? Perhaps it is really as it seems. The US is actually frightened of Cuba's example. Thank you once again for the invitation to be here today, and very best wishes for all your efforts over the coming months to finally defeat this illegal blockade of the Cuban people. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I think those words have inspired a few people to take to the chat. So thank you for that, and also for the message that this is from the whole of the trade union movement. Can I just say, before we move to our next speaker, apologies to those of you who had a few technical difficulties joining. However, we've got to the bottom of it, and it was for a very good reason, which was that although we had booked this call to be for more than 100 people, when we reached 100, unfortunately, we had to change some of the settings unexpectedly. So apologies for that, but it's because we had loads of people joining us. So we are now back on track. Okay, it is now my great honor and pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Barbara Montalbano, the Cuban ambassador here in London. A warm welcome.
Dear comrades from the Cuba Solidarity Campaign in the UK, I thank Rob, the CSC Executive Committee, and all of you for the opportunity to exchange with you in this open forum with the participation of leaders and members of the campaign. For me, it is a very important moment. Fernando's intervention makes it unnecessary for me to speak on the situation in Cuba. My speech today has the sole purpose of paying a gratitude tribute to you all. In this tribute, I include the individual members, the local groups, your executive committee, your staff, and all the affiliated trade union organizations that do so much support the work of solidarity. One day, the history of the international solidarity movement with Cuba will be written. The Cuba Solidarity Campaign in the UK will surely take the topmost place that it has won and deserves. In an upward process, the campaign structured its work based on knowledge about what a reality, providing the necessary information on who they wanted to help and why they wanted to express solidarity with that people. The well-known publications, brochures, and Cuba C magazine have been very effective tools. I believe that if a summary is made of the materials that you have prepared and distributed, and indeed useful reference text would be obtained for any reader interested in the Cuban topics. The value of the information treasured in them is incalculable. The campaign has known how to conduct its effort following its principles: respect, honesty, transparency. And given the reasons behind creating the campaign and working for Cuba have not essentially changed, you have kept your firm's intentions throughout all these years. There is no greater challenge than the commitment towards those we must think, acting in a way that does not disappoint the trust entrusted in us. Cuba has survived 11 US administrations. In Girón, we inflicted the first military defeat of the USA on our continent. We did not hesitate when the October crisis seemed to threaten our very existence. We have never sold ourselves to the highest bidder. We do not accept unfair proposals to improve living standards at the cost of giving in one of our principles. We survived the fall of the so-called socialist bloc. We create free health, education, and social assistance systems for all citizens. We have developed our culture and exports, science and biotech. We have adapted to the times and take on the challenges that reality imposes on us. We have never left a vulnerable citizen stranded to his fate. We do not give what is left over, but share what we have. Surely, we have not done everything well, but we have never stopped trying. And in this arduous and complex process, under the threat and pressure of powerful neighbors, we have been accompanied by the CSC. Geographically distant, the Cuba Solidarity Campaign in the UK is a key element contributing to the rapprochement and the best relationship between our countries, regardless of any difference. I thank you for denouncing the blockade and demanding its lifting, for your important contribution to the liberation of the Cuban Five, for their campaigns to raise funds when we have been hit by weather events or by a pandemic such as the coronavirus, or to collect instruments as equipment and donate them to schools of arts. I thank you for the recognition and defense of Cuban international medical cooperation, for the Henry Reeve Brigade nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize, for believing in Cuba, for defending Cuba's right to its sovereignty and self-determination. I thank you for all the great and good that you do every day. Now, before I end, I have the pleasure of announcing here for the first time that the Cuba Solidarity Campaign has been given a special award. I'm pleased that ICAP, the Cuban Institute of Friendship, which Fernando is the president, has conferred its special 60th anniversary medal upon the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. Congratulations to you all, you deserve it. ICAP have produced this special video tribute, which I hope you will all enjoy. Thank you once again.
To Rob Miller, Director of Cuba Solidarity Campaign in the United Kingdom. Dear friend, the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the Peoples, ICAP, is honored in awarding the commemorative stamped 60th anniversary of ICAP to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign in the United Kingdom, work that we share with dream and utopias makers who accompany us all over the world. ICAP take advantage of this opportunity to recognize the endless expression of solidarity from our British friends during the past 40 years since the foundation of this distinguished organization in Europe. Cuba Solidarity Campaign in the United Kingdom is a prestigious organization and has become a forceful reference not only in the region, but also in the international movement of solidarity with Cuba. It is fair to recognize that Cuba Solidarity Campaign, alongside trade unions in the country, is one of the solidarity organizations in the world that promotes and makes the reality of the Cuban Revolution known. Its more than 5,000 members and around 400 grassroots branches throughout Britain are an evidence of the overwhelming support of the country's working class for us. Demonstrations, strikes, protests, public activities, big concerts, signature collecting, letter sending, photo exhibitions, audiovisual materials, funds collecting. All of these activities have distinguished an organization which has not had any problem in strongly expressing their unconditional support to Cuba. At the same time, you have strongly demanded the lifting of the U.S. blockade against Cuba, returning back to Cuba the illegal territory occupied by the Guantanamo Naval Base, and expressing your support to the rights of our people's self-determination and sovereignty. You played an important role during the 16 years of the international campaign for the liberation of the Cuban Five, spreading by all possible means the truth about the case, including a very hard work of influence in the British Parliament. Organizing visits of our relatives to the United Kingdom and relevant public events as the Justice International Court held in London in 2014, attended by outstanding personalities and judges from different countries are some of the most visible. We will also thank the noble role that Music Fund for Cuba has played, including the valuable funding contribution and necessary material donation for the arts teaching in Cuba, as well as specialized equipment for children with special educational needs. Our volunteer work brigades and our Revolution Square have exhibited the British trade union's flag. Thanks to the CSC and its trade union members for celebrating the International Labor Day together with our people along years. We hope that this recognition will also be useful to pay our tribute to all those friends who have passed away and made a great job, oftentimes in a discreet way. Their light will keep on illuminating and accompanying those who today make from the Cuban Solidarity Campaign a vigorous, unstoppable solidarity force and full of the wisdom of those who had made history and the happiness of the new generations. Our enduring Che Guevara one state, let's all be the nightmare of those who like to deprive us from our dreams. The Cuba Solidarity Campaign has shown that it is possible to dream fully if we work with determination. Workers' unity and their ideas force will be able to move mountains, and great friends as you will keep on accompanying this unredeemed island in its will for being free, prosperous, and sovereign. For the fighting times that we have lived together, for today's and for the upcoming battles, health. Long live ICAP's 60th anniversary. Long live friendship with our peoples and organizations. Fraternally yours, Fernando Gonzalez George, Havana, March 20th, 2021, year 63rd of the Revolution.
Very emotional. Thank you so much for the great honor that you have done to all of us by the award and by this incredible video. It is very, very much appreciated and a great honor for all of us. So please pass on our thanks. And in my capacity as chair, I think I just want to extend them. What was so wonderful in seeing that was how every single person plays a part, and the diversity and the breadth of the involvement and the reach of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. And that only works because of the friendship. So thank you so much. So we are now at the beginning. I spoke about how difficult this year has been for everybody here and across the globe. So we wanted at this meeting to update you on COVID-19 situation for Cuba, both at home and internationally. So I'm delighted now to introduce somebody that you will recognize, because Susan Mickey, Professor of Health Psychology at the University College London, is part of the COVID-19 Behavioural Science subgroup of SAGE, the Government Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. It's been such a delight for me when I've turned on the television and seen you there, Susan. So it's been very, very good to know that there's somebody there that is going to be addressing this crisis with all that you bring. So I'm absolutely delighted to ask you to address us, and you will also be with Dr. Lauren Collins, who is a Cuba specialist academic. So over to Sue and Lauren.
Thank you, Diana. And before I begin, just to say how really moved I was by that film and the award. It's absolutely fantastic. And I feel so proud of CSC and all its members and what it's done. I want to start off by saying something about the general approach to managing pandemics, and then talk a little bit about what the UK has done before passing over to Lauren, who will take you through some of the highlights and challenges of managing the pandemic in Cuba. Are the slides up? Somebody's sharing a slide?
Not yet. Yes.
Okay, let me know when they're up, because my Zoom's a bit odd.
They're up now.
Yes, they're up.
Great.
You just, yeah.
Great, good. Okay, so if we can have the next slide. Thank you. So here I've just listed some principles that the World Health Organization has espoused for many years, and those countries who have battled with previous pandemics, such as SARS and MERS, have developed. So the first is when a pandemic threatens, to act fast and hard to remove basic human contact across households, but also across borders, to bring transmission levels really low. The second is to set up a very good system of test, trace and isolate, one that's run and supported within communities. Because for people to come forward to be tested, or if they have symptoms, to have their contacts traced, and also to accept being isolated, it requires a degree of trust within the community. But this is absolutely essential, because the first issue about having lockdowns, reducing border control, ensuring there are border controls, is to get community transmission very low. But if you don't also have a test, trace and isolate system that works well, then there's not the possibility of jumping on outbreaks when they inevitably occur. It's a bit like if you have a fire in your house and you've got little embers still glowing and the potential for fire, that will always spark into a new fire. You need to have the hoses there, the fire blankets there to put these things out. Thirdly, really important to engage communities for mutual support and also for education, not to have just a top-down communication strategy, but engaging where people are discussing and are listening to people who they identify with and they respect. Any kind of containment of a virus absolutely depends on human behavior, what they know, how motivated they are, and also what opportunities they have to adhere to the advice and the restrictions that are being given. And fourthly, one of the tragic things about this virus is that it inevitably affects those who are living in the most overcrowded housing conditions most, who are living in the most public-facing jobs, who are working in the most unsafe environments. And so by the very nature of the virus, it has a tendency to increase any inequalities that are existing. And so it's incredibly important that government policy should recognize that, and the policies should be working to reduce those inequalities and that disadvantage. So giving financial and practical support to people where needed, giving accommodation to isolate where needed, being able to restructure economies and create new jobs where other jobs are being lost. And another really important principle I should have put on here is the importance of the global perspective, of internationalism, of multilateralism. No country can solve this problem on its own. I mean, this is true for everything, including environmental sustainability and peace and all the things we know about. But, you know, one of the things this pandemic should have been made clear to people that whatever their political persuasions, that, you know, you have to look after other countries in order to solve this problem globally. So I want to just go through something about how the UK stacks up according to these kind of criteria. If we could have the next slide, please. So the first is about, did they act hard and fast? I would say, I would characterize it more by delay and dither. And as we know, painfully over this last year, there's been a big narrative of got to protect the economy and wealth comes before health. Well, what the world has shown is that this is completely false, that those countries that have done best in managing the pandemic are also those that have protected their economies the best. You can't have wealth without the health of the population. Next. Then when we come to test, trace and isolate, that has already cost an eye-wateringly £36 billion. This has been a failure. We've had tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. It's been a failure all the way along. The testing has been inadequate in terms of the strategy for it. It's not been prompt enough. The tracing has been put out to private commercial companies who don't have the expertise or the experience to run a test, trace and isolate system. And so very few contacts are being given by people because you absolutely need to have trust for this system to work. And the isolation, again, has been a failure. My own research is showing that more than half people in the UK, even those with symptoms, let alone those who think they may have it because of being exposed, even those with symptoms, more than half are not isolating for the amount of time they should. Why is that? It's because they need to go out of the house to work, mainly low-income people, people working precarious jobs where they feel they may lose their jobs. They have to go out for caring responsibilities. They have to go out for to get provisions. These are the kind of explanations we're given. Other countries pay people to stay at home. The amount of money that's offered to people in the UK is less than the minimum wage. More than 80% of people who apply aren't given it. Other countries, it's just everybody who needs it is given the money so that they can afford to stay at home. We don't give any alternative accommodation. The great majority of people in this country can't isolate at home. They don't have big enough houses to be able to isolate at home. Even New York City offers free hotel accommodation to those who've tested positive or been in contact, close contact with somebody who has COVID. Free transport there and back, free meals, children can go, even offer pet care. This is New York City. Other countries throughout the whole world, whether we're talking about New Zealand or Cuba, Uruguay, other countries in Latin America, Kerala, India, Norway, Finland in Europe, they offer accommodation when it's needed. Even really poor countries can do this. They offer door-to-door, checking up on people, whether they're all right, offering to go and help to get provisions or provide social, psychological support even when needed. Our country so relatively wealthy, is just doing none of this. Next. In terms of engaging communities, I think we've all seen the methods of communication, the fact that communities haven't been engaged with, there haven't been any meaningful partnerships or joint problem solving. There's never been a coherent government strategy informed by participation by the population. Next. They've also had really what I'd call a strategy of blame and punishment rather than support and enablement. So, for example, when we know that people aren't isolating, what does the government do? Instead of giving the material and the financial support that the Scientific Advisory Group in Emergencies has advised continually over these last few months, they slap on a £10,000 fine if you're found not to isolate. What does that do? What it does is mean that people aren't coming forward for testing if they fear that they couldn't isolate if they're found to be positive. And they're not going to give the names of their contacts, friends and families who they also know can't afford to isolate. Completely counterproductive. I could go on and on about such examples, but I don't have the time. The policies, instead of reducing inequalities, have increased them. So providing support for people with mortgages, but not for people with rent. Giving financial packages to people who are salaried, but not those who are freelance or in precarious jobs. And what we've seen is this crisis being used to bring in repressive measures. We've seen the awful police bill that's on the table, distract from a whole range of failings, undermine our public sector. You know, that £36 billion could have been given to the public health infrastructure that's been denied of funds for so long, to build it up into a really good system, could have been given to the schools to provide more spacing, to make sure that they're safe, could have been provided to help workplaces be safe. None of these things have happened. And what we're seeing now is very likely COVID-19 will become a disease of the poor because of the lack of the kind of strategies that are needed. And finally, going back to what I was saying about the importance of internationalism and seeing this as a global problem, I'm afraid the UK, like many other countries, hasn't covered itself in glory in terms of their rather greedy vaccination policy. And we need to support the WHO's COVAX and other initiatives and really see vaccination as a public good. Huge amounts of taxpayers' money from this and other countries have been put into developing these vaccines, and they shouldn't be being sold in the way they are for private profit when countries aren't able to access them. So that's a backdrop of what we should be doing, what the UK is doing. And now I'll pass over to Lauren to take you through the Cuba situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. And I'd just quickly like to say thank you very much to Cuba for the honour from ICAP. I had to turn my camera off for a moment to wipe my eyes so I could read my notes to say this, my piece. Okay, so Cuba's COVID-19 death rate is exceptionally low. It's 3.2 deaths per 100,000 of the population. It's a small fraction of the UK's death toll. If the UK had been as successful as Cuba has, we would have had around 2,300 deaths instead of more than 126,000. And that's only counting people who died within 28 days of a positive test. So when Cuba faced the pandemic, it had a lot of challenges and it had strengths too, a lot of strengths. I'm going to mention some of the main ones. First and foremost, in challenge terms, the illegal blockade. The US policy has been to suffocate Cuba's economy so that it breaks the revolution, basically. And on top of existing US sanctions, which make it so difficult for Cuba to trade with the rest of the world, as we know, Trump tightened sanctions, which interrupted deliveries of fuel, stopped US travel to Cuba, reduced remittances, that's where families in the United States send money to their families in Cuba. And it has also meant that almost all sources of emergency funding for COVID-19 support are not available to Cuba, and it's not available. Another of the challenges for Cuba is an aging population. We know that COVID mortality rates are strongly related to age, and 16% of Cuba's population is over 65. Similar to the UK's, we have 19% over 65. Cuba's success, of course, in having 16% of its population over 65 is due to its health system. It's actually an excellent health system. Also, there are infrastructure challenges. Havana and other cities are got highly dense populations, and there's a lot of overcrowding, which creates conditions that favour the spread of the disease. There are also a lot of multi-generational households, which we know from our own experience puts older people at risk. I'm also going to mention telecoms, actually, because internet at home and even landlines are not the norm in Cuba. And this has been a problem for working at home. And although there's lots of TV programs, educational TV programs in Cuba, it has stopped interactive teaching of children and students. Now, we all know how the internet and phone calls have really helped us during this last year. It's helped us with social contact, which we otherwise wouldn't have had. And in Cuba, the lockdowns, quite correctly, have been more strict, with public transport, buses and things being stopped, and you can't move around the city that you might, as you would have done before. Curfews are applied. So lockdowns have been particularly hard for Cubans. But balanced against that, of course, are the strengths. Cuba has an established public health system, which is free, well respected, and as Susan said, most importantly, it is trusted. And it has an emphasis on the prevention of disease. It also has the highest ratio of doctors to people in the world. It has 8 doctors per 1,000 people. Just for reference, the UK has 2.8 doctors per 1,000 people. Cuba also has a great deal of scientific expertise. Since the early 1960s, Cuba has emphasised scientific education at all levels of the curriculum. And as a result of this, it has an advanced research and development sector, which has enabled it to develop a strong biotechnology centre. This has been important for developing vaccines and treatment, more of which later. Cuba also has an amazing organisational capacity at the local level. Throughout the revolution, Cuba has emphasised the importance of community and community organisation. National organisations like the Committees for the Defence of the Revolution, the Cuban Women's Federation, all have branches at the very local level. Membership and engagement is high, and all state workplaces, including farms, are unionised. This has made for strong community resilience. Local communities, next slide please. Local communities, municipal government and popular councils, which I'll explain in a minute, have accumulated a wealth of experience during many years of working together. And this includes drawing up detailed plans as part of disaster preparedness activities for things like hurricanes and other natural disasters, including epidemics and pandemics. Solidarity in Cuba is strong, social solidarity. Things like organising sports and children's entertainment, computer clubs, cultural events is the norm at the community level. And during the special period when Cuba's economy suffered so badly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, local collective action and bridges between the mass organisations, the Cuban Communist Party, municipal government, People's Power, these were strengthened and they created more organisational capacity at the community level. And this is a time when the popular councils were created and incorporated into the system of local government. And they're very important. They are made up of elected delegates, members from the local branches of the mass organisations, and representatives from important services and production entities in that locality. So, for example, local medical staff, social workers, teachers, transport managers, agricultural cooperative members. These close links between local government, popular councils, the community, allow local people to deliver public services tuned precisely for that community. They are the heart of the community. And then there's the local health system. And the bedrock of the local health system is the doctor and nurse healthcare teams who live and work in the communities that they serve. They look after around 120 families, and they know their living conditions as well as their health profiles and their health vulnerabilities. They provide proactive care rather than reactive. Healthcare teams work closely with polyclinics, which provide emergency care and specialists. And importantly, the Ministry of Public Health, known as MINSAP, have offices in every single one of Cuba's 186 municipalities. Now, I tell you all that because it helps to explain why their test, track, trace and isolate system has worked so well. So put together, Cuba's scientific expertise and the popular councils, municipal government, local health care teams, community organisations, they all play a part. Testing, the strong research and development capacity allowed Cuba to develop its own testing for COVID-19, which they wouldn't have been able to import at scale. They wouldn't have been able to afford to import tests at scale. Tracking, so that these close links that I've talked about between these various structures at the local level means that precise locations of outbreaks can be identified, and they can be reported nationally to the COVID Defence Working Group via the local offices of MINSAP, giving the national government a picture of what's happening in the country. In terms of tracing, these same organisational resources make it possible to rapidly trace back to identify the source of an individual's infection and trace forward to identify the contacts and possible new cases. In terms of isolation, all persons receiving a positive test for COVID-19, whether they're symptomatic or not, are hospitalised for observation. All contacts of infected persons are isolated either at home or if the home isn't suitable, in isolation units. And support provided following isolation. If you're at home, you get visited daily by a member of your local health team. Wages are continued to be paid, and community support for things like shopping, childcare, family responsibilities is there, it's a given. Next slide, please. Treatments. In the UK, we've not focused on developing treatments, but in Cuba, there are two particular ones. I think there are probably other ones, but interferon alpha-2b and interferon gamma, they were developed in Cuba, and they've been used to treat other diseases in the past, like dengue and meningitis, and it's been used to treat COVID-19, lessening the symptoms and making it less likely that you will become critically or gravely ill. And I think also they developed a nasal spray, so that if you're infected, you had a nasal spray, which obviously dealt with the virus in the nasal system, which helped to reduce contagion. Next slide, please. And we come to vaccines. Now, Cuba is the only country in the whole of Latin America to develop a vaccine for COVID-19. In fact, they've developed 5. Sobrana 2, Sobrana Plus, Mambisa, and Abdala. Sobrana 2 Soberana 2 has just completed phase 3 of its trials, and the Abdallah one is about to start. And Cuba will vaccinate its entire population this year. It will also supply vaccines to countries unable to afford the expense of those made in the US and in Europe. And after I finish speaking, we're going to have a video, a news item about Cuban vaccines. Finally, I'd like to mention international solidarity, because as everybody says, nobody's safe until we all are, until other countries have dealt with the pandemic themselves. Now, the Henry Reed Brigade was established in 2005, and since then it has sent over 400,000 health workers to 164 countries. It's attended 2.6 million births, conducted 9.1 million surgeries, administered 12.8 million vaccinations, and it's estimated that it has saved 5.7 million lives. During the pandemic, it's mobilized over 3,800 medical staff, 61.2% of them are women. It has assisted over 39 nations, including Italy, South Africa, Kuwait, Mozambique, Mexico, and many of the Caribbean island nations. It's assisted them to respond to the pandemic. It has treated 360,000 people and saved over 10,000 lives. And people and organizations around the world, in recognition of this, have nominated the brigade for the Nobel Peace Prize, as we heard earlier, and we know about Cuba Solidarity's efforts towards that. So, okay, so now there will be a short, I think it's from CNN News, in fact, video about Cuba's vaccine efforts.
Cuba hopes this is what the payoff looks like to a big gamble. While many other developing countries have competed with richer nations to import vaccines against the coronavirus, Cuba has been making its own vaccine. In March, 2 out of 4 potential vaccine candidates made in Cuba will begin their third and final trials. If the trials are successful, Cuba's would be the first vaccines developed in Latin America.
The main objective of this clinical trial is to show the clinical efficacy of our vaccine candidates. After that, we could be in condition for start a massive immunization in Cuba or in some other countries of the world.
You believe that everybody in Cuba, the 11 million people who live here, could be vaccinated by the end of this year?
Yes.
Well, Cuba is only now just beginning to vaccinate people on a large scale as part of the third trial. Cuban scientists tell CNN they have already produced more than 300,000 doses of Sovereign 2, one of their vaccine candidates, and could eventually make millions more doses each month. The pandemic has all but destroyed Cuba's economy. Beaches that usually would be full of tourists are now empty. The vaccine, though, could help change Cuba's fortunes. As researchers here say, they can produce enough to sell overseas and even market vaccination vacations, offering the vaccine to tourists as a way to restart the Cuban tourism industry. It may seem unbelievable that a poor island where there are shortages of food and basic medicines like painkillers and antibiotics can create a cutting-edge vaccine, but Cuba has produced its own vaccines going back decades. Cuban scientists say the same U.S. sanctions that isolated the island forced Cuba to become a biomedical pioneer. Cuba has been following established protocols and providing updates on their vaccine development, international observers say. This is very good news, and we are following these results carefully, he said. First, because the Cuban population will directly benefit from their vaccine candidates, and this at some point could control the transmission in the country. Cuban scientists say the island likely could not afford to import vaccines from abroad, and pursued multiple vaccine candidates in case some did not pass the trials. If Cuba ends up with more than one working vaccine, it could allow doctors a greater arsenal to wipe out the coronavirus here.
I also think that at the end we might be able to implement what we call prime and boost, which is using some vaccines for the first doses and then boostering or reimmunizing with a second vaccine candidate in order to enhance the previous immune response.
Iran is carrying out large-scale trials with Cuban vaccines. And Mexico is expected to begin trials. As the world struggles with vaccine shortages, other countries may be calling soon.
Thank you so much. That was extremely informative. So Sue and Lauren, thank you for your contributions, but also one of the really important roles of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign is to challenge the myths and provide the information that's so lacking otherwise. And I think your information has really assisted us in that process. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is National Secretary of CSC, Bernard Regan, who will talk a little about the political context for Cuba today. Over to you, Bernard.
Thank you, Dana. It's a real honor and a privilege to follow Fernando and Barbara on this call. And it's very humbling to receive the award from ECAP, which is for everybody in the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, all the members, all the affiliates, and all of those who've been involved in campaigning. So our profound thanks to ECAP for that recognition. And we can only say that we will commit ourselves, obviously, to continue to build the campaign and only wish we could do much, much more. It's normal on these occasions to pay respects and to give thanks to people, but I do on this occasion want to make a particular thank you to the staff at Cuba Solidarity Campaign, because it has been an extremely challenging year. I want to thank Ryan, Trish, Natasha, Jeff, and Rob for continuing to work over this period, which has been very difficult. And then also some of the colleagues have faced individual challenges, which have also added to the difficulties of the COVID situation. So on behalf of everybody here, a profound thanks to our staff for the work that they've done over the last 12 months. In respect of Cuba, clearly the last 12 months, as Fernando and Barbara have said, has been amongst the most challenging that Cuba has faced, particularly since the end of the Soviet Union and the early 1990s, with the beginning of the special period. It's been the most aggressive 12 months that we have seen. With the last 12 months of Donald Trump's period in office, he introduced no less than 90 coercive economic measures to attack directly the Cuban economy. And the United Nations report, which Cuba has submitted in preparation for the discussion at the General Assembly in May of this year, estimates that the cost to Cuba has been in excess of I have to get this right, $5,570 billion. An absolutely colossal amount of money. So much I'm even staggering over the numbers myself. And then during that time, as I think Barbara has said, it wasn't only the Cuban economy that has suffered, but indeed the extraterritorial nature of the blockade has impacted elsewhere, with the Office of Foreign Assets Control imposing $2,403 million worth of fines on countries and companies that are being engaged. And that leads to not only those companies being fined, but of course it has the effect, the chilling effect of deterring others from doing business with Cuba. So we've seen banks in Britain being reluctant to transfer money to Cuba and actually acting in a ways which is accompanying and in a sense complicit in that blockade continuing. I think it's worth just reflecting also, if I may, on the actual scale of the Cuban economy in the world. When I looked at the World Bank figures, for example, looking at the United States GDP, the GDP of the US is $19,485 trillion. It's the equivalent of 24% of the whole of the world's GDP, 24%. It's absolutely colossal. If you compare that to Cuba, Cuba's GDP is $96.8 billion or 0.12%. In other words, to put it more graphically, the American GDP is 200 times bigger than the Cuban GDP. That's the colossal disparity. Yet here is a country imposing blockades and economic measures and challenges on a country which is far less wealthy, far less rich. Just to give you another illustration of the scale of this attack, in the last 12 months of 2020, in that period, in the course of the presidential elections for the United States, Joe Biden spent alone $1.69 billion in his election campaign. Donald Trump spent $1.96 billion. In other words, their combined election campaign money was the equivalent of 4% of the Cuban GDP. That's the scale of expenditure in terms of the United States. And that blockade very much stays in place. And it's important that people appreciate that. Sometimes when discussing Cuba with people, I think people tend to forget it. And I'm inclined to say to people, in the way Bill Clinton said to his election campaign when he was standing in office, he said, "It's the economy, stupid." In other words, he was telling his campaign supporters that it was the economic questions which actually shaped and formed everything else that they were campaigning about in terms of that election. Well, there are times when I would like to say to the British media, it's the blockade, stupid. They don't address the real gravity of the blockade as it happens and what the impact that means. In addition to that, of course, over the last 12 months, Cuba has faced a situation with COVID that Lauren and Sue have graphically described in terms of the responses. And on top of that, of course, Cuba has not only been dealing with those issues internally, but has been going across the world to help in 40 countries across the globe, including countries in Cuba, in Europe, like Italy. And I have friends in Italy who are conscious of that and extremely appreciative of the work of the Cuban doctors. And indeed, I think it was from Italy that the initiative to call for the Nobel Peace Prize to be awarded actually began. And it's something I'm sure everyone here will want to support and give their full backing to. But of course, in addition to the blockade and the continuation of the blockade and the weight of that on the development of Cuba, and in addition to the question of COVID, we also have to take account of the fact that Cuba is moving to the single currency, actually harmonizing its economy in order to strengthen its ability to trade internationally. And that throws up many, many problems. And I know from past experience of talking to Cuban comrades that when you have questions to ask, I've never been in a situation when the questions I've thought about haven't already been anticipated by the Cubans in the work and the preparation they've done. But needless to say, it is a complex and challenging situation that they've faced and one which they're working through. And I'm personally looking forward to, with interest, the Cuban Communist Party conference, which will be coming up this year, in which I'm sure those plans will be strengthened and developed. But one thing that is very clear and is asserted very, very positively throughout that is the commitment to retain the socialist aspirations that Cuba has always held at the center of the way in which it develops its economy, the way in which these changes are brought about, and the way in which they develop for the future. So our commitment as a campaign remains absolutely unrelenting and absolutely as strong as ever. Some years ago, I think some of you may remember, with the election of President Obama, we looked forward to a change in the attitude of the United States administration. We hoped that the first Black president of the United States would have much more empathy with Cuba and would bring forward more positive policies. Sadly, that wasn't the case. In fact, he deferred any real changes until the end of his second term of office. And I think that wasn't at all kind of a positive measure. So I think we have to treat with some caution the fact that we've got Donald Trump out and Joe Biden in. Certainly it's a welcome change because of the kind of level of aggression that Trump exuded in terms of his policies. But I don't think any of us have any great illusions in how Joe Biden might change things. Indeed, all of his office and his assistants and his supporters are saying that his approach will be slow, will be measured, and it's unlikely to be a priority in the coming months. So I don't think we can expect a rapid change. But I think what is positive is that there's a growing voice inside the United States of America itself calling for an end to the most aggressive forms of the blockade that are being carried out. 80 members of Congress, that's nearly a fifth of all members of Congress, have joined an organization called the Alliance for Cuba Engagement and Respect, calling for an end to the most cruel examples of the blockade itself. In the south of Florida, there have been a whole host of mayors and other civic leaders who've called for an end to the block on remittances being sent to Cuba. And that's very significant because over the decades, it has provided many billions of dollars that have helped people in Cuba and helped the Cuban economy. So we can look and watch carefully. We hope that he moves swiftly. We hope that those changes will be rapid, but I think we're not going to hold our breath over how Joe Biden responds. I say that because if you look at his record, he supported the recognition of Guaido in Venezuela as the president against President Maduro. And he supported many of the sanctions against Venezuela. So his own track record in terms of recognizing the rights of the sovereignty of the people of Cuba and of Latin America, I think can be called into question and it should be challenged in every respect. It's interesting also to see, therefore, that one of his aides that he has appointed, a man called Juan Gonzalez, who was also worked with President Obama. It's interesting to what he said in 2017 about Obama's approach to Cuba. He said that the Obama doctrine in Cuba could be summarized as a policy of subversion by engagement. In other words, exactly what we said at the time of the AGM back in those days, that what we were seeing from President Obama was perhaps a change in tactics, but not a change in strategy. The objectives of the United States of America were still to return Cuba to the world of the capitalist system, of which it is the center. So I think that Biden will very much be similar, although he's clearly not seeing Cuba as a priority for the immediate future. I think that's why it's important for us to continue, obviously, the campaign, to continue to build the campaign, to challenge our own government, to ensure that our government is not complicit in what the United States is doing. And it's interesting looking at the Foreign Affairs review, which Boris Johnson has just released, and the way in which the Conservative government and the Conservative administration in Britain are talking about approaching foreign affairs. They're talking about rearming the nuclear warheads in Britain, expanding armaments expenditure and so on. And clearly, I think in many respects, they will finish up mirroring the policies of the United States of America towards China and towards other countries of aggression in terms of the economic field, and displaying their armaments as a way of implicitly threatening other countries if they choose to assert their independence and sovereignty, as Cuba has done. But the other aspect of Johnson's foreign policy review is that he lays emphasis on what he calls soft power. And soft power is defined by the World Bank as being able to persuade people and to win your policies through what they call attraction and persuasion. And Britain is deemed to be the third most significant power in terms of achieving those ends through soft power in the world, according to indices that the World Bank has produced. And it's interesting in the context of that, and this relates to the issue of the media and our need to be vigilant about the media and the way in which it presents Cuba. He makes the point that the BBC, for example, in any 1 week is listened to by 468 million people across the globe when it broadcasts in 42 separate languages. So what the BBC says, just to take one example of the media, is something that we should monitor carefully. And I think as you know, a number of comrades have done very well, we should be taking up and challenging myths and false stories that are presented about Cuba in the media and ensure that they're challenged at all times. Going back to Biden, of course, we would say that the critical issue of judging his presidency from the perspective of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign will be the extent to which he dismantles the blockade and all of its trappings. But over and above that, and the ultimate litmus test, of course, is the decision of the United States of America to withdraw from Guantanamo Bay. They have no right to have a base on Cuban soil, and Cuban sovereignty should be recognized not only by the ending of the blockade, but by the removal of that United States occupation that is taking place in the east of the island. We have lots of work to do, and I'm sure that all of you are committed to that work and are enthusiastic to pursue it. We want to go on recruiting more people to the campaign. We want to increase the affiliations. We want to increase the reach of the campaign. So I hope in the coming 12 months, you'll be engaged in that. Thank you for your work over the last 12 months and look forward to working with you all in the challenges over the months to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernard, and thank you for all that you do as Secretary of CSC. Before we move to our final speaker, just a quick reminder, could you please get your messages, flags and banners ready? And thank you for those of you that have posted questions. We will do our best to answer as many as we can here, but just a reminder, if we don't manage to cover them all here, we will ensure that they're included in the online reports at the end. So our final speaker is the director of Cuba Solidarity Campaign, Rob Miller, who's going to update us on the campaign, including our finances. But I do just want to take this moment to add all of our thanks, not just to Rob, but to Natasha, Trish, Jeff and Ryan as well, for all that you've done over the past year in such difficult circumstances. You've kept the campaign more than alive. You've done it proud. Thank you from all of us. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Rob Miller, Director of CSC.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you to everyone at this meeting. It's great to see everybody here in person. It was obviously really moving to see that the video message from ECAP. It arrived unannounced, and it was really brilliant to see that they'd gone to the trouble, as someone said, of putting all of that together, which reflected a lot of our work over so many years. And I'd certainly like to add my thanks to each and every one of you and every member of the campaign, the affiliates, the local groups, the trade unions, and so on and so forth. It really is a lovely job of work to be able to work alongside so many dedicated and hardworking people who put so much into showing solidarity with a small island on the other side of the world. So thank you to each and every one of you. And of course, that award is a recognition of everybody's wonderful efforts. I'm here to speak primarily about the campaign and where we are at this point in time. I know people have been concerned how we're functioning and keeping the organisation going. So this is an opportunity to really look at that situation. It has been incredibly challenging, as you can imagine. When the lockdown started a year ago, it was difficult to see how things would pan out and how we as an organisation would manage to carry on our work of solidarity at this time. We've taken a number of measures, obviously, as we've gone along, and this short report I want to give you now, I hope will allow you to understand what we've done, how we've done it, and reassure you that I think the campaign is in good hands, and we've done very well, I think, in the circumstances. We took a decision early on to furlough some staff, and that has varied as we've gone through the procedure. Right now, some staff are part-time on furlough, and it's a mix now. You can blend your furloughing, but that has been incredibly important, particularly for the finances of the organisation, which you'll hear about. I also would like to thank the staff. I know they've been thanked a lot, but they're a brilliant team. And as someone mentioned, they've had their own difficulties during this period, as I know so many people have across the campaign. So thank you, particularly to Tasha, Trish, Ryan, and Jeff for all of your brilliant work over this period. We've kept our magazine going, Cuba C, and there was some surprise when it came out the first time, but you've got used to it now. We are able to keep that going. I know Natasha does an amazing job on that magazine alongside everybody else, and I think that's so important to keep up our communication with our members. Many of our members don't, are not online, aren't able to access meetings such as this. And Cuba C is a lovely, wonderful magazine. It's both informative, but it's also campaigning. And I think it's a brilliant resource that we should be incredibly proud of. I expected the worst as far as our memberships and affiliations went over this year, partly because we're not out and about. We're a public campaign. We attend over 30 trade union conferences. Our local groups meet up and down the country, and all of that has been very difficult, obviously, this time. So when we finally compiled the annual accounts and we looked at the membership figures, I have been incredibly pleased and a bit surprised that in fact we have grown our membership over this period. Not by much, but we haven't had a loss, which is what I was anticipating. So our membership over the past 12 months, that's March to March, we went from 3,268 individual members to 3,292 members. And when you consider that we lose 300 to 400 members a year through all sorts of reasons, that means we are recruiting. We've recruited this year 400 to 500 members this year, which is a real testament to all of you, and I think it's a reflection possibly of all the online work we've been able to do in reaching new constituencies of people. Our affiliations also have slightly increased, and that again is amazing because a lot of trade union branches in particular have not been meeting as regularly as they would normally, and we've gone from 510 affiliates a year ago to 529 now, so a small increase again. So I'd like to thank everybody who's helped with that, who's followed up on the affiliates and the members, and so we're in a healthy position in that respect. In terms of finances during this difficult time, the executive committee have met consistently through the pandemic and are monitoring the finances. We have an excellent system. Trish does a lot of the bookkeeping with Jeff, and we have a treasurer, James Fitzsimmons, who's here, who does an amazing job of keeping overlooking our accounts, and I'd like to thank James for all his hard work through this year and over many years. We have shown a loss this year, and we've shown a loss in our accounts of around £20,000 as an organisation. Last year we had a surplus of around £5,000, so it's been a difficult, challenging year. However, when you consider we've had to abandon all of our tours programs and brigades, we've had to abandon all of our public campaigning work at trade union conferences. In that light, I think it's not actually too bad a situation. And in fact, when we discussed it at the executive last week, I think people were surprised that it wasn't a lot worse. And I'm confident that we can recover that loss over the coming year. I think in particular, we've done extremely well on a number of fronts. We took a decision early on to increase our sales catalogues and really make sure that we had a good offer for people and that we would be able to fulfill that. And we've increased our online sales by around 75%. And again, it's another way of communicating with our members. And so that's been very important. We've increased the members in our 267 club. Our Friends of Cuba have gone up by about 10%, and we're very grateful for that. And you'll have seen we've done a blockade buster raffle this time. We're aiming for around 10,000. We've already brought in about £7,000 now. So we're doing everything we can to offset that loss, and I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to move forward in a positive way financially and in terms of our members going forward. In terms of our campaigning now, I mean, that has been the biggest challenge because we didn't want to stop campaigning, particularly at a time when Cuba needs solidarity more than ever. We started off our work in the pandemic with an online campaign calling for the temporary lifting of the blockade. And it was one of the biggest campaigns we've ever run. We had over 17,000 people signing that petition from all across the globe, and over 50 members of parliament calling on the British government to press the American government to temporarily lift the blockade in the face of the pandemic at this time. We launched a fundraising appeal for Cuba's response to COVID and raised over £30,000, which went to the Cuban Ministry of Health. And that's brilliant, and thanks to everyone who contributed to that. We've organised around 10 very successful public meetings, about one a month on average, from all sorts of areas, looking at COVID, looking at the Women's Federation, education. We've had speakers like Len McCluskey, Jeremy Corbyn, Gerardo Hernandez, Rene Gonzalez, and so on and so forth. And they've been seen by thousands of people from CSC and across the country. And of course, many of you, our executive and others, have spoken at online meetings of our local groups, trade unions, CLPs, and so on. And we're really grateful for everybody who's organised and participated in those meetings. The Nobel Peace Prize campaign was very successful. Over 8,000 people have signed the Nobel Peace Prize petition, and Britain is one of the countries that has nominated more people than most. We've had 42 official nominations for the Peace Prize, including 28 members of parliament and 14 academics. Right now, we're campaigning to lobby our own government, because one of the best ways to show the United States that there's a different way of dealing with Cuba is to show and highlight the British government's relations with Cuba and strengthen those relations. So we've launched an early day motion 1550, and we're asking our members, and I'm pleased to say that nearly 1,000 of our members have now written to their members of parliament using our online action. I hope all of you will, if you haven't done so already. And we have 35 members of parliament so far having signed that motion. Of course, if your member of parliament doesn't sign it, it's still good to contact your member of parliament, regardless of who they are on this particular question. Finally, I want to wrap up now, because I know time is short. We've got a big meeting coming up soon. We're very honoured to have the Cuba's permanent representative to the United Nations, Pedro Luis Pedrosa Cuesta, speaking at our meeting on the blockade. We're going to have a series of meetings on the blockade in the lead up to the UN vote on the blockade, which should be in May this year. And that meeting is on the 29th of March at 6:30 p.m. alongside an academic, Salim Lamrani, looking at the in-depth at the impacts of the blockade. Finally, I want to thank each and every one of you again for all of your work. It really is brilliant, brilliant, brilliant to be part of such a wonderful campaign as Cuba Solidarity Campaign. And we're going to finish just with a few videos of some of the supporters who have supported the Nobel Peace Prize campaign. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rachel Hopkins, and I wish to celebrate the Henry Reeve International Medical Brigade and all the Cuban doctors who have gone and helped others, particularly during the coronavirus crisis around the world. Their founding principles of health, peace, humanitarianism and solidarity are a shining example for all of us about how cross-border compassion around the world can really make a difference to people's lives. It's absolutely vital that we celebrate this, and I think this year, more than any year, that they should be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2021.
Hi, I'm Mick Whitley, the Labour Member of Parliament for Birkenhead. Here in the NHS and across the world, healthcare workers have worked extraordinarily hard over such a difficult year. In the last few months, I've also been moved by the thousands of Cuban healthcare workers travelling around the world to support their fellow medics in the struggle against COVID-19. Therefore, I'm delighted to nominate Cuba's Henry Reeve International Medical Brigade for the Nobel Peace Prize for 2021.
My name's Richard Bergen. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Leeds East in the north of England. I'm very happy and proud to have officially nominated the Cuban doctors, nurses and technicians of the Henry Reeve International Medical Brigade for the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of their work helping to fight coronavirus and the humanitarianism they have shown in emergency health situations around the world over the last 15 years.
Hello. The work of the Cuban medics internationally, taking their skills all over the world, has been well known for many, many years, and it is truly inspirational what they do. It's actually incredible when you look into it in some depth. You know, Cuba is a small country, but it has a massive, a huge humanitarian heart, and I am absolutely pleased to be able to add my support and my union's support to endorse the nomination of the Cuban medics to receive the Nobel Peace Prize.
Sinn Féin are delighted, indeed privileged, to be able to nominate the Henry Reeve International Medical Brigade from Cuba for the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize. I think they're perhaps the most fitting nomination that there's ever been for this proud accolade. I think they're a credit to the Cuban people, to the Cuban Revolution and everything that Cuba stands for. As the world was locking down in the grips of COVID-19, Cuba sent its best and its finest people out across the world to help many thousands of people, and fair play to them for doing that. They have earned the honour that they deserve, and in 2021 they should pick up the Nobel Peace Prize.
This health pandemic has been such a challenging and difficult time for so many people. So for me, there's been a glimmer of hope to hear about the wonderful Cuban doctors and nurses helping so many people in so many various countries across the globe. They travel thousands of miles to a relatively poor Caribbean island to help those in need. Now, I hope that millions of people will get the opportunity to hear of this amazing story of human solidarity across borders. This form of international sharing and cooperation is surely the only way we will be able to emerge from this current crisis. Now, I hope the Cuban medics are awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, a truly fitting recognition for all the wonderful work they do. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure to nominate the Cuban doctors for a Nobel Peace Prize. Wherever there is an emergency anywhere in the world, the first people on the scene from international support are always Cuban doctors. They go to Pakistan, they've been to Italy for the corona crisis, they've been to many places in Africa and all over Latin America. They truly are an example to the world of what a good quality medical service can do to improve the life chance of people going through the most terrible emergency, from disease through the pandemic to disasters such as floods, fire, or of course earthquakes. So I hope they receive a Nobel Peace Prize for their work and their efforts.
Very powerful messages, and thank you so much, Rob, for all that you were able to present to us that's been happening. So we are now arriving at that moment where we want to take some action, our contribution, just one of many, as we've been discussing, where I would ask everybody to get your banners and signs ready. When I give the signal, please hold it up for 20 seconds so that they can flick through and get a range of different pictures. And then I'll indicate when the 20 seconds is gone. If you don't have something to hold, you can have a fist or a thumbs up or a big smile or whatever it is that you want to contribute to the campaign. So now is the moment, please. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. And by one small gesture like that, we are linking up across the world, and we can use those images to spread what I have certainly found as a very inspiring as well as very informative meeting. So We are now moving on to just a few minutes we have for the questions that are here, and I'm aware that there is absolutely no way that we can ask all the questions that we've had submitted or answer them in any reasonable format within the time frame. But I think we've done the right thing, which is make sure that we have the presentations here collectively, and to pledge that we will make sure that you have access to that online. So what I thought I would do is to let you know the questions that were submitted in advance, and you will have picked up on some of the ones that have come up today on the chat, and then pass to Rob to respond as best to any of the specifics, and then we'll do the detailed responses online. I think that's really the only way that we can deal with this in the time that we have. So here is just a summary of some of the questions, and a pledge that we are not going to answer them all this minute, but they will follow up. So from Jonathan, this is the 60th anniversary of two giant conquests, the victory at Playa Girón Bay of Pigs and the year of education in which illiteracy was eradicated in Cuba. How are these events being celebrated in Cuba, and what actions will CSC organise to celebrate them in the UK? From Ross, from all the reports we get over here, the situation in Venezuela continues to be really difficult. To what extent is that affecting Cuba at this time? From Sheffield CSC, Cuban Americans supported by the National Network on Cuba and Canadian Network on Cuba are calling for monthly protests against the blockade. Will National CSC organise similar protests in London and encourage local groups to participate? From Monica, we were going to have some women from the Federation of Cuban Women over to celebrate the 60th anniversary for their founding. Do we have any plans to celebrate the wonderful work of the FMC now? And I did also spot on the line a couple of more detailed questions from Sally about Cuba and provision of the vaccine, and from Anne about Joe Biden's appointment of the US representative to the UN and the implications that might have. And I know after that on the chat, there's been a number of other questions as well. Some of these issues have been addressed in the presentations, but I think, Rob, if there's particular points you'd like to either pick up on or hand to somebody else, we just have a few minutes to do that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Diana. Well, I'll do my best in the time we've got. We do want to finish at 2. The first one from Jonathan about the 2 anniversaries. We are looking at organising a major online public meeting on Playa Girón in April at the anniversary of the Bay of Pigs, and we're hoping to get some messages from combatants in Cuba on that. And obviously we'll be covering it in Cuba C magazine as well, and we would obviously like groups to cover Playa Girón, and we'll do everything we can to support and help with any group meetings. Again, with the literacy anniversary, which has been mentioned here, again, we are at the moment, I mean, I know Alpha Kane, who's here now, was going to say a few words. I'm not sure we're going to have time, but he's recording at the moment a number of testimonies from people who participated in the literacy campaign. And we're hosting a fringe meeting at the National Education Union, where we'll use some of those testimonies in April, and we will endeavour to have another large event on the literacy campaign and cover it in Cuba C magazine. You will know that we had planned to bring over various speakers this year, and that's made it difficult, but we are doing the best to obviously cover all of those major anniversaries. The question about Venezuela, I know Francisco, I'm really sorry about this, was preparing a response. I don't think we're going to have time to take it now, but what I will make sure we do, Francisco, is we can maybe answer that question to people here and also in Cuba C magazine, and make sure that we explain about the relationship with Venezuela and Cuba and the impact that the blockade, and particularly as far as Cuba goes, the sanctions on Venezuelan shipments of oil, which I know have been of a major problem for Cuba. The question from Sheffield CSC about the international campaigns and the caravans, the car and the brilliant caravans that you've seen around Miami and Florida and so on. with the Cuban flags and the bike ride and so on. They are taking place in various countries around the world over the next few months, and we hope to participate in them. Obviously, we're in a situation of lockdown, which is slightly problematic, and we have to assess how that goes. I know that Miriam here and some of the Cuban residents are organising a small caravan, a bicycle caravan, on the 27th from the Elephant and Castle. They'll be leaving the Elephant and Castle at the bottom of the ramp there at 2 o'clock. And if anyone wants to join Miriam, they need to be at the bottom of the ramp at the Elephant and Castle in London. This is just a bit of a London-centric thing. But I know that groups around the country may want to do protests, and we would obviously advertise and support those in the local communities, be they bikes or just doorstep or online meetings around that time. Obviously, we want to encourage people to do as much as they possibly can, and we as a national organisation will look to see what we can do to join those caravans going forward. I do want to say that today has been brilliant, and the images from today will be used and put together as a package of showing our support for those on those caravans over the next period. So I hope that helps answer that question. We had a question from Monica about the FMC. We had invited people from the Federation of Cuban Women over this year. They were unable to come. We hope to do that again in the future, and we will do our best to obviously maintain and celebrate our links and the work of the Federation of Cuban Women. There are lots of questions about vaccines. I know the ambassador was going to answer one about vaccines. The US representative to the United Nations, we can obviously discuss that at the meeting on the 29th, when we'll be speaking to the Cuban representative at the United Nations, who'll be the perfect person to answer that question. And questions about the dual economy. We hope to have Dr. Emily Morris in the future, who can talk about the economy in more detail at a public meeting. So I hope that people will bear with us and be confident that we will answer all of those questions either directly to the individuals, online, through QBC, but we will do everything we can to make sure that all questions are answered as we always do. I hope that's okay, Diana. Maybe you want to just sum up.
Thank you. Yes, and I think I can also say that, as well as while you were speaking, I was noting that Natasha has picked up on some additional points in the chat relating to other questions, which I did my best, but there were over 60 comments. So I really appreciate all the questions that have been asked, and thank everybody for their contributions today. So it remains for me in just the final minute to thank everyone who's come today, and a particular thank you to all our speakers. This hasn't just been an excellent meeting, it's been a really inspiring event. Everybody has been doing the best they can, but we have all felt that we're battling against all the odds. I think today we felt like we've come together, and all of those contributions have added up to something really, really powerful. So we look forward to the time when we can meet again safely in person. And of course, we'll do all we can to make this happen. As we've heard, the situation in Cuba is difficult, and the most important thing we can do is to continue to develop our campaigns against the US blockade and the aggressions against Cuba. We've also got to continue the pressure on the government in this country to develop relations with the island, to demonstrate that despite perceived differences, it is possible and even mutually beneficial to have positive relations with other countries. I have confidence everyone here will continue to help develop campaigns of solidarity with Cuba, and that united together, the Cuba Solidarity Campaign will continue at the forefront of international solidarity with the proud and honorable people of Cuba. Another world is possible. Venceremos. Thank you all. Thank you.
Hi, well, thanks for all your questions. We didn't have all the time on Saturday to answer them at the open forum, so we're going to answer a few of them now. So we had a question from Ross, who asked a question about the situation in Latin America, and particularly, he says, from all the reports we get over here, the situation in Venezuela continues to be really difficult. And to what extent is that affecting Cuba at this time? And I think the best person to answer this would be Francisco Dominguez. Francisco.
Yeah, thanks very much. Venezuela has been applied more than 300 coercive measures, includes oil, gold, food, finances, and just about everything else. And we have to understand that Venezuela is a key axis of the US attack on Cuba, particularly because of oil, but not exclusively. There is plenty of trade between the two nations, and the relationship between Cuba and Venezuela is key to both countries' survival. Recently, Biden has renewed the executive decree declaring Venezuela an initial extraordinary threat to the US. The Senate Government and Security Committee, passed legislation that there could be no trade with Venezuela at all. Marco Rubio and the Cuban Americans are behind this, and the effects on Venezuelan people is more than 100,000 people have died that didn't have to die. Nevertheless, there are some positive signs. Maduro is just giving house 3,500,000. And the one thing I want to emphasize in this conversation is the role of the European Union. The European Union is quite accomplished on all of this. It sanctioned 11 members of the National Assembly in Venezuela, including those who are in favor of elections. And then they're retaining illegally, in European financial institutions, more than $6 billion which belong to Venezuela, including the Bank of England, the Royal Bank of Portugal, Euroclear, and so on. And what is important here is that the European Union, the Sakharov Committee, is proposing, or at least is accepting the proposal that Agnes is given the prize, the Sakharov Prize for the defense of human rights to none other than Janine Agnes. And the people who actually proposed this are exactly the same ones who were given the Sakharov Prize for human rights defense, which were two Cuban, Berta Soler and Coco Fereñez. So it's quite important to understand this dimension. And I think the only possible real moral action by the European Union and the United States to stop these sanctions immediately, lift them right away unconditionally, is completely unacceptable, is illegal, it's international, breaks international law, and is a crime against humanity. So sanctions off right away.
Okay, thank you, Francisco. Hi, well, one of our questions is from Jonathan, who asks about the 60th anniversary of Playa Giron and also the Great Literacy Campaign in Cuba. And he asks how we are going to celebrate these events. And we've got Alpha Kane with us here, who I know has been doing a lot of work around the literacy campaign, in particular for a National Education Union fringe meeting coming up at their national conference. So Alpha, could you say a bit about the work you've been doing around the literacy campaign and how that might help us to celebrate this great anniversary?
Yes, sure, Rob. Thank you. I just wanted to, first of all, put the context of the literacy campaign, how it started. This was Fidel Castro addressing the United Nations on the 26th of September, 1960. And then he said, and I quote, "Next year, our people propose to launch an all-out offensive against illiteracy with the ambitious goal of teaching every illiterate person to read and write. The entire population are preparing themselves for an intensive campaign, and within a few months, it's very important, Cuba will be the first country in the Americas to be able to claim that it has not a single illiterate inhabitant." So all the youth joined the campaign in the call of Fidel. And then what's happened? It has been a very, very positive and a very successful campaign. I want to just add a few aspects which I think show the successful campaign as it was carried out in 1961, from April 1961, even though it started in January 1961. Success in achieving 98% functional literacy and basis for educational and cultural massification. The second one is that it's success in transforming all those participants as teachers and students, all those who participated. And this, next time I will be talking more about it, of particularly oral testimonies from those former brigadistas. And one of the most important aspects of the campaign is that the success in desegregating Cuba along gender, class, race, rural and urban lines. And the murder of Corrado Benitez, the poor black teacher, as Fidel Castro called him, a martyr, a symbol of the revolution, who has been killed in January, the 5th of January, 1961, by counter-revolutionaries, agent of the imperialists. He is somebody who is a symbol of the campaign. He has been actually called, a brigade has been called after him, named after him. And that brigade was the one that went to Varadero to prepare for the youngsters, the 1,000 youngsters who joined later on. Now, what we have been doing, there's also a success. Finally, I think, before I come to what we can do, in demonstrating the popularity of the revolution and the ability of the leadership to mobilize the population for the greater good. The idea of patria, the idea of Cubania were there. But what can we do? And what have we done so far? We held an amazing meeting last year, jointly with the National Education Union, including the General Secretary of the Sindicato Nacional de Trabajadoras de la Educación, la Ciencia y el Deporte, the Teachers Union in Cuba, and with the General Secretary, la señora María González Nurka, González Olvera, who is also part of the meeting. And then currently, I believe that we will be organizing a public event later this year to use some of the literacy campaign videos that I've been doing. So what I've been doing so far, I was in Cuba in January and February 2020, and in view of the studies I'm undertaking at the moment, I interviewed in Havana, Villa Clara, Moron, Ciego de Avila, all the provinces to the east, and brigadistas, and the pride they had into their involvement when they were young was absolutely immense. And we will be using those testimonies in the program that we are currently planning to have next year with NEU and CSE. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alpha. Thank you. Hi, another question we've had is from Monica, and she's asked about the work we're doing with the Federation of Cuban Women. She was quite excited by the idea that we were going to have some Cuban women over this year as part of the celebrations for the 60th anniversary of the founding of the Federation of Cuban Women, the FMC. I think it'd be good to ask the question of Carol Regan, who's our women's officer, about the kind of plans we might have for celebrating the 60th anniversary of the FMC now. Carol.
Okay, thanks, Rob. I think you mentioned earlier that because of COVID, that we had to cancel, and also we had plans, but they're plans that have been postponed, not cancelled. So we do look forward to organising that in the future, as well as a delegation of women trade unionists, which was another plan which we hope we'll be able to carry out later. But there have been things going on in the meantime. It's not just we've forgotten about them. We had a very well organized, very successful online event with a number of women speakers from Cuba, the US, the UK, and of course the ambassador as well. And then of course we've had local ones, one last Thursday organized by the London East and Southeast region of the TUC, where to which Natasha spoke on behalf of CSC. But I think and also there's Cuba C, which we've had articles and features of on in a number of issues. There's also information on Cuba Debate, for example, on what's going on currently on the discussions for the update of the family code. But I think I just wanted to mention a couple of achievements, because it's important that we don't forget these things, because before the revolution, women made up 5% of the workforce, and today they're almost half of the workforce. And, you know, when you look at our country and you compare it, currently, the majority of judges are women, attorneys, lawyers, scientists, technical, finance, education, health, you name it, health workers. Women are not just the majority, but very prominent in those professions. And the FMC has organized over these last 60 years and has now 4 million members, quite a lot of professionals and many thousands and thousands of volunteers. And the affiliation fee is just 4 pesos. And I think that's from girls from 14 onwards. The FMC has also been very much involved in the commission, which drew up Cuba's 1975 and 2018 constitutions, plus, as I said, the family code. And it's all embedded in law, the rights of women. It's currently also trying to is going to draft a new family code to go out for public consultation. It was meant to be 2021, but maybe COVID has delayed that somewhat. But as I said earlier, women are guaranteed economic, political, social and cultural family rights within law. And the very important family code that Vilma Espen promoted in 1976 attempted to persuade men to take part in household chores and childcare. And Article 26 states that marriage is an equal union and that household labor and childcare should be shared with both parents. That's not necessarily always the case, and that's something that the FMC are continually working on and will be looked at in the revision of the new code. But Cuba has entitlements for women around the world are the envy of many countries around the world. For example, pregnancy. Whenever a delegation goes over from this country, they're always amazed at what they have as far as maternity rights are concerned. They have up to 40 weeks at 60% of pay. And when they return to their jobs, women are allowed 1 day a week to breastfeed. And then later on, they introduced the possibility of men also taking part and having the paternity leave in not just the woman. So all of these things have been very, very important developments. I mean, there are many we could talk about, but we haven't got all that time. And obviously, hopefully, we'll be looking forward to having them here in the future. I just wanted to mention one thing, which I think, given what's going on currently in this country on the debate about violence not against women and where women are in society, the FMC had a survey together with the National Office of Statistics in 2019. 96% of the people interviewed, which were women and men, found that they had not felt discriminated against because of sex, gender identity, or sexual orientation. I think that says an awful lot about the achievements, not just of the FMC, but the whole of Cuban society. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carol. Great.